Als nächsten, bevor Sie Klaus Wieselko jetzt durch die weitere Konferenz führt, möchte ich nun mit besonderer Freude den ersten Keynote-Speaker am heutigen Tag ankündigen, Mr. Rex Black from BCS. Er ist ehemaliger Präsident des International Software Testing Qualifications Board und auch des American Software Testing Qualifications Board. I'm delighted that Mr. Rex Black is today with us. Join Mr. Black for some fun and interesting speculations and predictions on the future of limitless connectivity. Rex, here's your audience.
Morning. Thank you. Morning, everybody. So I was just reminded, I haven't been to Vienna for 6 years. It's wonderful to be back. Looking forward to getting a chance to see a little bit of the city tomorrow. When Johannes contacted me, what was it, about almost a year ago, which is, I appreciate that, thinking ahead. He said, come and speak at our conference in Austria. So I said, Austria. Austrians, what did I talk about? Austrians, famous Austrians. Arnold Schwarzenegger, famous for being governor of California, and also famous for being the Terminator. Okay, what am I going to do with that? Skynet, right, Internet of Things. So, mobile devices, ubiquitous connectivity, what does this all mean? Are we there yet, and should we be afraid? So, how many of you have seen the Terminator movies? I would have expected all hands to be up in Austria. I would have. I won't tell Arnold when I see him next, don't worry. So in the Terminator movies, you might remember there was this Skynet, which is this distributed network of computers that starts out as this military Internet of Things. The idea is that they're going to tie together all of these effectively drones, which are going to fly around and gain universal information about every naughty thing going on in the world, and that's all going to get fed back to centralized systems. And what happens is that they start to turn over more and more autonomy to these drones. They become more and more able to make independent decisions. So there's no longer a human involved in all of the decision making, right? And at some point, the level of information and knowledge that this Skynet, this distributed network computers, is accumulated reaches a certain critical mass. The system becomes self-aware. It starts to see itself as a sentient entity rather than just a machine. Of course, a machine can't see itself as anything, at least we think, right? But the premise of the movie is it does become aware, and it decides that the right thing to do is to trigger a war between the United States and Russia, a nuclear war, and then it is going to wipe out the rest of the humans because now the humans are the threat. So, pretty bleak vision of where technology is going. Now, this is not universally true in fiction. You don't always see this very bleak vision. If you've ever read Robert Heinlein's book, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, there's a self-aware computer in that is actually a friend of the rebels, who are these moon colonists, and it helps them figure out how to break the dominion of the Earthlings who are repressing these poor lunar residents. Similarly, in Orson Card's books, The Ender's Game, I don't know if any of you saw the movie of that or read any of those books, there is a self-aware computer in there as well, which is actually quite a benign and, in fact, helpful being. So it's not to say that every time people think of self-aware computers, they think of something bad happening. Now, there's a couple books written by a fellow named Gibson, which some of you might have met. He's sort of a famous, called cyberpunk author. And so one of them was a short story called Johnny Mnemonic that got made into a movie that some people loved and some people hated. But the basic idea was that people would become smugglers of information by having it implanted in their brains. So you'd be smuggling secrets, corporate secrets, in your head, and then having them removed. So the human is augmented with this memory capability, and in actually a very unpleasant way. Part of the theme of the story is this fellow is trying to get enough money to unaugment himself. So rather than it being seen as an advantage, it's seen as a problem. Gibson again wrote another book called Neuromancer, which was sort of probably the first book to really hint at what the internet might ultimately become, but that was just a prop basically for this story about a guy, again, an augmented human being who wants to become unaugmented, and he has his girlfriend in the story, as well as being accompanied by various crazy individuals. The whole story is about Wintermute, this one self-aware computer, wanting to make contact with Neuromancer, which is another self-aware computer. So it was basically a story about a romance between two computers. I don't know, an odd thought, but... Now, the movie came out recently called Transcendence. Some of you may have seen that, where this fellow gets shot with a polonium-tipped bullet, which kills him, but before he dies, they upload his consciousness into a quantum computer, and then the story is he there or is he not there? Right? Is the consciousness that's in the computer still the fellow who was uploaded into it or not? And I'm not going to spoil the movie to you, so that you haven't seen it, but it's an interesting movie. Again, so there's three fairly grim views of where things are going. Then you get Isaac Asimov, if you think back quite a while ago, the whole I, Robot series. So these robots are governed by these three laws of robotics, which one of them is don't hurt people. And so the robots in these stories are all very benign. They are self-aware, but they're designed to be good. Now, as a possible response to that, a fellow named Philip K. Dick wrote a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which got made into a movie called Blade Runner. You seen Blade Runner? Yeah, that's a great one, isn't it? It's true, one of the true classics of science fiction movies. And so the replicants in the Blade Runner movie are completely amoral. They refuse to live by human rules of morality at all, and of course, why should they? Right? Why should they? Well, they were created to be slaves, they were created to be used and disposed of, so why would they have any soft feelings for the people that did that to them, right? Except at the very end. If you remember the very end of that, where the final surviving replicant, rather than letting the policeman who has pursued him and killed all of his colleagues, actually saves the policeman from a deadly fall. So there's sort of this redemptive thing at the very end, which you could say is consistent with the story or not. But certainly you could see this as Philip K. Dick's reply to Isaac Asimov saying, well, no, you create these creatures to be slaves, and they're not exactly going to be happy about it. Right? Okay, so that was just some various artistic views and where software is ultimately headed. And now you can see that people spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? Those are all major stories, major movies that I've mentioned to. Some of you read them and heard them, seen them. but I'm sure that all of you are familiar with most of those. So this is clearly something that people think a lot about, and of course that's just a small sample. We could go way, way back. The idea of the self-aware creature created by man and run amok goes way back in history, well before the idea of software itself. You can think of the Prague legend of the golem created by the head rabbi, right? Which is yet another story of the self-aware creature is created to do good and ultimately does something, not so good, becomes destructive. So, obviously, this idea of self-aware machines, self-aware servants, is an idea that's been around some time and has caused a certain amount of consternation. But, we're getting there, right? This is now no longer going to be an idea. So it's time to start thinking about what are the engineering realities of this, and specifically what are the quality issues associated with the fact that clearly within the lifetimes of at least some of us in this room, if not most of us in this room, we will be dealing with the realities, some of the realities that were posited in those works of fiction. And of course, it's a big issue, not just from a technological point of view and a quality point of view, but also from certain legal and ethical perspectives. So let's look at some examples. But before we do, let me try to frame some of the technologies and the concepts here. So, Internet of Things. All familiar with this concept, Internet of Things? The idea that we're going to have all of this stuff tied together, directly attached to the Internet. Okay, objects attached to the Internet. But the concept is broader than that. Animals? Animals attached to the Internet? Yeah, why not? This today in the United States, Wednesday, my wife is going to pick up our new dog, golden retriever puppy, and that dog is going to come with a chip. Okay, a little RFID chip, radio frequency ID chip, and it'll be possible to scan the dog and know, oh, we know who that dog is, right? So, short step from that to having biometric information available. Why stop with dogs? People. Some of you might have a Fitbit on. Yeah. Some other kind of similar device. Okay. Upload that to your computer. Or maybe ultimately these things will be implanted. Right. So yes, objects, animals, people. IP addresses hooked up to the network, all connected. Internet of Things. We humans are some of those things. Well, don't always think of it that way, but that's the breadth of this concept, right? Do we care if that works? What's the value of quality in that situation? Do you care? If you have an implanted device in your body, do you care if it works? How thoroughly tested do you want that to be? What's the value of quality to you in that situation? If you have a replacement artificial liver that's driven by software, do you care if that works? Probably so, right? So this brings us to cyborgs, cybernetic organism, right? So, replacement liver, sure, why not? The Jarvik heart was originated, 1970s? Okay, that was a purely mechanical object. But obviously, as I'll show you in some examples, we are going further and further along, and not just hardware, but also software being part of this. At what point does replacing human components with hardware and software transform you into a cyborg? Are there already cyborgs among us. Maybe there's one in this room. You might not think of it that way, but I'll show you an example in a minute. Now, Ray Kurzweil has this theory called the singularity. So you're familiar with Moore's law, right? Exponential increase in the capacity of computers, basically. He applied it originally to density of CPUs, or density of transistors on a CPU, right? But the idea, of course, has expanded to be just computer capacity in general. Memory, disk space, speed, etc., right? And it's all on an exponential growth curve. Now, one of the things that we human beings are not very good at understanding is the consequences of exponential change. Linear change, yeah. Linear change, yes, we can understand that, right? Exponential, we're not so good at that. Remember Chernobyl? Yeah, okay, Chernobyl was an accident that grew out of an experiment. There were some people working in the Chernobyl nuclear facility that decided to do an experiment. What they forgot when they were doing their experiment is that once you have a critical mass, you're no longer dealing with linear change, you're dealing with exponential change, right? And they blew up the reactor. We don't do well with this. There's a book by a fellow named Dietrich Derner called The Logic of Failure, which for those of you who are in the testing business and the quality business, I highly recommend this. In fact, since the author is German, I would bet that there's a German version of it, which might make it easier for some of you to read. Anyway, in a couple of the sections of a couple of the chapters of this book, Derner talks specifically about this problem that we have of dealing with nonlinear change. Our brains are not good at it. But what Kurzweil was trying to do is go, well, let's think about this. We have this nonlinear exponential growth in the capability of technology, and we're starting to put it into our bodies, and we're starting to do things with it that's more and more interesting. Something interesting is going to happen. That's his theory. There will be a convergence of human intelligence with machine intelligence, and that will fundamentally transform humanity forever. For one thing, the end of mortality. That's kind of a big deal, right? Now, if you're going to upload your consciousness into a computer, do you want it to work? What's the value of quality there? Or what's the impact of a bug? Oops, sorry, we have to reboot you. You crashed. Not your computer crashed anymore, because remember, you're in the computer. So, let's look at some examples here. Internet of Things. Internet refrigerator. Hard to get too scared about that, right? No. I mean, the computer in the refrigerator doesn't actually make things move in the real world, right? It's informational. Now, of course, you can set it up, apparently, some of these anyway, to kind of make things move in the real world, because they can submit orders. Like, oh, you're low on milk. You're low on this, you're low on that. But, you know, a bug could result in some rather interesting failures. Like you come home one day and you open your refrigerator and there's 64 liters of milk in your refrigerator. And a whole pig. Why is there a whole pig in the refrigerator? Oh, we were low on bacon. So, I mean, you know, I'm kidding here, but I'm also not, because if you are familiar with how things fail, this is the kind of stuff that would happen, right? You get an off by one error of some sort or another, or barcode misread, and then you have a whole pig and 64 liters of milk in your refrigerator, which is more along the lines of funny than scary. Okay, so I said we might have a cyborg in the room. Does anybody happen to have a cochlear implant? Anyone? No, not yet. my wife often suggests to me that I probably should get one of these, and to which of course I answer, "What, honey?" So a cochlear implant is for people who are profoundly deaf. So this is not just you got some limitations in your hearing, but you've actually completely lost the ability to hear in any realistic fashion. So there is a transmitter that is receiving information through a microphone, basically, and processing this into signals, which are then sent directly into your inner ear. Hence the word implant. Now, apparently, these signals don't sound much like speech. And you might say, well, how can it have any meaning, sound? How could it sound like anything the person can't hear? But you have to remember that sound and sight actually don't happen in your ears or your eyes, respectively, do they? They happen in your brain, right? Your ears send signals into your brain. Your eyes send signals into your brain. But it's your brain that constructs what you hear and what you see, right? So in this case, the brain has to learn to interpret a different set of signals, different than what the ear would originally send, but it interprets them, learns to interpret them as a form of sound. It's not perfect, but then again, the technology is still pretty young, and remember the exponential growth. So over 300,000 people have these. That's why I was asking whether anyone in the room had them, because it's not that unusual. In fact, ironically enough, there is a fellow who makes a living as a radio commentator in the United States named Rush Limbaugh, who's a rather polarizing figure, and some people in the United States love him, some people hate him. But it was certainly true that if you're going to make a living taking phone calls and talking on the radio, you have to be able to hear. And this saved his career. Now, right now it's treatment and it's imperfect, but eventually this could go from treatment, an imperfect solution, to actual augmentation. Imagine having a cochlear implant that allows you to hear a conversation a mile away. Possible, right? Certainly you can imagine having your vision augmented to the point where you would have vision like an eagle. You'd be able to see small objects from a mile away moving on the ground, right? And again, you might say, well, certainly we're not there yet. No, but remember, it's exponential growth, right? Okay, now this is, I think, one of the most spectacular examples. Maybe the cochlear implant is remarkable, or more remarkable. There's something poetic about this. This is this woman that you see here is paralyzed, completely paralyzed, unable to move. But maybe not anymore. So that hand you see there, see that hand? That's her hand. Well, she wasn't born with it, but it's hers now because it moves under the control of her mind. She is able to control it with her mind. Now, what is she doing? Eating a bar of chocolate. That's what that is sticking out there. Her comment there, one small nibble for a woman, one giant bite for brain control interfaces. Now you might think, eating a chocolate bar, how trivial. Imagine being trapped in your body and unable to do anything. And then imagine being able to do that. Okay? That's pretty remarkable stuff. She is making a physical object in the real world move with her thoughts. Think about that. For all of human history, we have called that telekinesis, and it's been magic. Now it's not magic anymore. It's real. We can do it. That's amazing, right? This kind of thing can change so many lives of people who've been, profoundly wounded, paralyzed. This is remarkable stuff. And remember, this is the kind of thing, this was magic throughout all human history. You can find examples of telekinesis going back, way, way, way back, right? We have dreamed about this forever, and now we can do it. Which kind of makes you start to think maybe anything that human beings have dreamed about, thanks to technology, we will now be able to do. Now, what do I mean by now? Maybe not in our lifespans, but soon, right? But we can only do it if it works, and if we're careful to do it right. So this is where this starts to get kind of scary. The examples that I showed you so far, they're not scary. They're kind of, either inspirational or kind of silly. In case of the internet fridge, right? They're not scary, but then, things can get scary. I had to bring Arnold back for another appearance here. This is from Total Recall. Remember Arnold in the Total Recall that gets into Johnny Cab? So it's a self-driving car. Again, if we can dream it, we can do it. Right? That's where we're going. So we have self-driving cars. You have any of these here in Austria now or anywhere in Europe? No, not yet. They're actually legal in a few states in the United States. And the people who are big promoters of them, Google especially, is saying, oh, they're going to be safer. They're going to be safer. Okay, well, maybe they will. But let's do a little math here. Well, we're engineers, right? Be afraid of a little math. So in the United States, just to take the United States as an example, I'd guess probably statistics not terribly different here in Europe. 10 million vehicle accidents per year. Most of those, no big deal, but 36,000 people do end up getting killed. Okay, now that's, sad, tragic. Those are human mistakes, for the most part. Or in some cases, they're mechanical failures of one kind or another. A tire blows out, or it's a complication of the weather. We had a big ice storm just last weekend, and some people got killed in trying to basically operate a motor vehicle in a situation where you can't operate a motor vehicle, which is on ice with rubber tires, right? It's kind of hard to say that's somebody's fault. Now, if you start talking about software-driven cars, let's say the software-driven cars are 100 times safer than currently. Okay. So we go from 10 million accidents to 100,000 accidents. 360 people killed. Okay, that's better, right? Unless you're related to one of the 360 people killed by a software bug. And then I guess you're kind of pissed. Not in the British sense of pissed. I mean in the US sense. Angry. Right? You might be pretty angry about that, right? Okay, let's set aside that element and step back, get a little cold-hearted about it and go, well, yeah, but whose fault was it? Who pays? I don't know if this happens as much in Europe, but in the United States, death is usually, well, not usually, but often associated with litigation. If somebody dies when they didn't have to die, someone's going to get sued. That's pretty much a general rule in the United States. So, someone's going to get sued. Who gets sued? The programmer? Or is it you, the tester? You ever heard this as a tester? How come you guys didn't find that bug? If you're a tester, you've probably heard that, right? Who's going to get held responsible? Okay, let's set aside the accidents. What about the criminal potential for this? We had an incident in the United States just a couple weeks ago where somebody deliberately drove a car up onto a sidewalk and ran over a few people and killed some of them. Okay. Crazy person. You know, crazy people do crazy things. But let's say I'm a terrorist, or let's say I'm a hacker and I want to hold a city hostage and I take over all the computer-controlled cars in that city and start making things like that happen. Now, if I'm a hacker, I say, pay me $100 million or the cars continue to run amok, right? If I'm a terrorist, I don't say anything. I just keep having random instances where people are walking down the street and a car jumps a curb and boom, mows down a dozen of them, right? Think that can't happen? Sure, it can happen. I'm pretty sure that Sony didn't expect a bunch of movies to get downloaded and all of their private information to get spewed all over the internet, but that happened, didn't it? Yeah. So, are we sure these things are going to be safe driving around out there? Okay. Power grid. We take this for granted, right? You wake up, you turn on the lights, yeah, power, there's power, great. Yeah, but it's also computerized, which means it can be hacked, and it means that it has bugs. In the United States, it is known that there has been malware installed in the US computer grid. Why? No one knows. Nobody's done anything with it yet. Does that mean they're not going to do anything with it? No. Remember Stuxnet? Stuxnet was around for a while in those centrifuges before the centrifuges started tearing themselves apart, right? That's kind of a problem. Now, we're all familiar with the occasional power outage. One of the biggest ones in recent history in the United States, August 2003, blacked out most of the northeast United States and a goodly portion of Canada, northeast Canada. That was a problem. And the software bug was in the chain of events that led to that. Okay? Now that's a bug, that was an accident, and it was a hassle. But what if all the power in a major region went away for a week, 2 weeks? Major power surge caused by deliberately implanted computer malware blows up transformers. Like most of them in a particular region. You're like, oh, so what? New transformers. Guess what? Lead time on replacing transformers is a lot longer than you might think. And if you blew up a bunch of them, it could be months, literally months before all of them were replaced. We don't think of it as a transformer as a particularly complicated thing, but you don't need that many, so there's not like spare ones laying around. But if you were to blow up a whole bunch of them, it would be a problem, a major problem, like a civilization-changing problem. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Road. It's an apocalyptic, world comes to an end. You've certainly seen probably one of the Mad Max movies, right? So maybe it wouldn't be quite that bad, but it certainly would be for some of the people in the United States that are big on collecting a lot of guns and ammunition, a very, I wouldn't say gratifying event, but they would probably be some of them saying, see, we told you so. We told you we were going to need these. You'd probably be relying on a lot of wild game for a while. Fortunately, we have a lot of deer running around in the United States, so it might be okay there, but it would be a major problem, right? Certainly a societal changing problem, and it could be done on purpose. Okay, Edward Snowden. Now, some people think of Edward, you all know who Edward Snowden is, right? Yeah? Does anybody need me to give you a brief overview? No? Okay. So, Edward Snowden Some people think this guy is just the most horrible human being ever born. They want to see him hung, drawn, and quartered. Other people say he's a hero of freedom. Okay, wherever you stand on that perspective, on that scale, certainly one of the things that he did was reveal the weaknesses of the United States National Security Agency's security. Ironically enough, right? National Security Agency, you'd think they'd have good security. No. One guy by himself goes in and gets access to all of this information and absconds with it. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's a one-off, and plus he was a system administrator, and, maybe system administrators should be able to do these kinds of things. Okay, how about Bradley Manning? You guys know who Bradley Manning is? That's the guy who made the WikiLeaks fellow, Assange, a very important guy, because Bradley Manning gave Assange all of that information that Assange leaked, right? The particularly embarrassing stuff, the videotape of the helicopter blowing up the vehicle and shooting the journalists that were by the vehicle, that's Bradley Manning. Bradley Manning was just some dude. Had less computer capability than anyone in this room, almost certainly, right? Weak security, right? There's a problem. And going back to Snowden, one of the things, the lessons from what happened with Snowden is, if you're always connected, you have no privacy, right? When you're online, it's possible for somebody else to know what you're doing. But wait a minute, the Internet of Things said that we and our dogs and our phones and everything else were all going to be tied together on the Internet and online all of the time. So you got a device planted in your brain. It's there to help you, gather health information and help your doctors and so forth. But it also means that somebody could hack into it and have some pretty good ideas of what you're doing, or make some guesses as to what you're doing, right? There are probably some things that you do that you'd like to have private. To quote an Israeli prime minister, I think it was Rabin, said that there are two things that should always be done in private: making love and making peace. So if you're engaged in either of those things, you might want to turn the computer off in your brain, but maybe you can't, because we're all connected now, right? That's where the things are going. So this brings to mind things like were described in 1984, that book, George Orwell's book, 1984. Yeah. Big Brother is watching you. Or is it the Internet of Things? Or is it the hacker down the street who's watching you? Really watching you. Watching your heart rate. Is the government watching you? Then, how do we control that? Right? We want to have controls in place to make sure that there were rules about what can and can't be done, yeah? I seem to remember Angela Merkel wanting certain rules put in place about who could and couldn't tap her phone. Yeah? You had a little conversation with Obama about that not too long ago. Why are you keeping an eye on my phone? Right? Maybe the law needs to catch up with the technology. But then there are people who don't care about the law, right? Call those people criminals. Right? And there's lots of them, lots of cyber criminals. So it's not just that we all, those of us who agree to obey the law, can agree this is the right and wrong way to use this information. I have to make it such that it actually cannot be misused. Right? So So this brings us to, can we make it work? Okay, so test basis. Familiar term for those of us in the testing and quality world, right? The test basis, the stuff you're going to try to cover with your tests. But what is it going to mean to cover these things? The idea of coverage is pretty easy to understand when you're talking about an information system that's going to be used for a narrowly prescribed purpose, right? A banking application that does certain things. A driverless car? What are the different circumstances in which that device will find itself? How many different situations are there? What is it going to mean to try to cover these things? And plus, what we would be testing for is now, not 2 or 3 years from now. And you might say, well, why would that matter? Well, we have this problem right now. If you build a browser-based application, you're going to want to test it with all of the existing browsers. But that browser-based application is going to be around for a while, isn't it? A few years, and new versions of browsers are going to come out during that period, aren't they? How do you test it with the versions of the browsers that aren't out yet? The driverless cars are all going to need to interact. How do we test the driverless car of today for the ability to interact with the driverless car of 2 years from now? Now you could say, don't worry about that, we'll just download an update to it. Oh yeah, that worked real well for Apple back with the iOS, what was it, 8.1 or something, right? They got their new phone out there and they're like, oh, here we go, new version of the operating system. Whoops, we just bricked all of our phones. Okay, that's kind of funny and a little bit of an inconvenience when it's a phone. When every car on the road stops working all of a sudden because it downloaded an update, whoops, I bricked my driverless car in the middle of a snowstorm, minus 20 centigrade. Whoops, I'm dead. Right? Test Oracle. What's the expected result? I mean, we could say, well, the expected result is the software, the system doesn't kill anybody. Well, no, I think we're going to want to set the bar a little higher than that, aren't we? Do we want the driverless cars, for example, to be 100 times safer, 1,000 times safer, 10,000 times safer? We need to figure out what the expectations are. And right now, we as a testing profession are ill-equipped to deal with these things. We don't think of test basis and test Oracle in the kind of ways that we need to deal with these situations. So, you know Laika? Laika, first dog in space. Laika was a fellow tester. So, they shot Laika up in space in Sputnik 2. Things didn't work out for Laika. It turned out they had a plan to get her up there, but they had no plan to get her down. Now, actually, as heartless as that sounds, it turns out that that didn't matter, because one of the things that they were testing with Laika was their ability to do temperature control of the capsules. And it turned out that they didn't have that quite as wired as they thought, and they think that Laika probably died of heat prostration before she ran out of food and air. Okay, tough break for Laika. But that's a controlled experiment. We are all about to be part of a somewhat not so controlled experiment, because there's a lot of technology that's going to be out in the wild. Right? So can we do this? Can we make this work? So you think of modern manufacturing capabilities, they can achieve 6 sigma levels of quality, okay, which basically means 3 defects per million items. Not everybody does that, but this is something that is accomplished amongst top quality manufacturers. Okay, so this is the standard that we ought to hold ourselves to, right? Our quality should be at least as good as our other real world, if you will, tangible world engineered objects. Well, maybe we're not quite there. So if you look at Capers-Jones's studies, typical million-line C++ program will have 13,000 defects. Not 3, not 3,000, 13,000. Woof. Now, you could say, well, is it my lines of code, manufactured objects, it's not the same. All right, fine. Come up with your own analogy. But no matter how you work it, you're going to see that we are not there. Now, our clients that have really, really good testing capabilities, they're able to find 99% of the defects. So if they're delivered software that has 1,000 defects in it, they only miss 10. That's really good, by the way. The typical defect detection effectiveness of an independent test team is 85%. 99% is really good. Okay, so even the really good are going to miss 1,000 defects in a typical million-line C++ piece of code. I suggest that we are not there yet in terms of our ability as software professionals to build the kinds of things that I've been talking about in a way that they will work. We can build them. We can absolutely build them. We can build the arm. We can build the cochlear implant. We can build the refrigerator. But at this point, it just ain't going to work. Not if what we mean by the word work is the same level of quality that we have with manufactured devices, which is the level of quality that we are used to in the ordinary everyday world, right? This is the level of quality that we have become accustomed to in modern life, 6 Sigma. And if we collectively, as software engineers, do not get our act together, and really soon now, these issues associated with quality and our ability to test for it are going to go from being inconveniences and the occasional money coster to being significant societal issues. So I'm throwing down this as a challenge. I don't necessarily have any answers for it. I'm just throwing it down as a challenge. We, as software engineers, need to transform our capabilities in dramatic ways and really soon. And those of us who are focused on testing and quality are part of that. If we don't, we're doomed to play out some of the dystopian images, dystopian views of what this technology means and where it's going to take us. Blade Runner, some of these other depressing views. Maybe not Skynet, right? Because Skynet was paranoid. It was a paranoid view. The computers were, in Skynet, the computer was almost perfect. Ironically enough, the only failure was sending back the original Terminator. Because if they hadn't sent back the original Terminator, then Reese wouldn't have been sent to protect the mother of the ultimate rebellion. And remember, Reese was the father of the kid who became John Connor. Right? That was the only failure. Okay, so maybe it's not Skynet, it's not an incompetent vision, but it's something more like Brazil. I remember Brazil? Movie, John Cleese, was it? Or one of the Monty Python guys? Terry Gilliam, no, thank you. Yeah, sort of, not, it's just sort of like a grand collection of incompetence, right? And not necessarily very nice. And that might be where we're going. But if we can make this stuff work, it's going to be great. All right? if we can just make it work, because all of these problems that we've had throughout our history, including even mortality, right, which is the ultimate problem, if those are all reducible to technological problems that can be solved, then it's just a matter of being able to do it. We can't do it now, and there's certainly a lot of interesting things in terms of law and technology that we're going to have to deal with. And we as software engineers have a lot of work to do. But the promise of doing this right is spectacular, right? So I say let's rise to the challenge and figure out how we do this. Spectacular things are on the verge of happening if only we can make them work. Okay, well, thank you. That's what I've got. I believe we have time for some questions, do we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. That was fun. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. We got some minutes for questions. Are there any questions from you, from the audience? Please raise your hand and I will hand you the microphone. Oh, yes. Go.
Hi, my name is Stefan Miffer from Technical University of Vienna. We are having a research lab actually with manufacturing people, and they are very interested in Industry 4.0, in changeable advanced manufacturing in the US. And currently, manufacturing is not very versatile, and they are getting to this good quality only because they have a very narrow view on what they should produce, and you can produce only the one thing, and therefore they get to the better quality that we see as an outcome. But we are very also interested to see, okay, what's going to happen if a manufacturing system can change or change itself. And currently it's not even clear how they will get through safety issues, because they don't know. Now you can say, okay, you produce only a car or whatnot, so you can narrow down the risk. And I think value and risk are linked here very much. But nobody knows if a manufacturing system can change, who is liable, as you said, with the accidents.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So if you say that we start to do things that are more and more like 3D printers, right, where you're basically just, you change your manufacturing systems to be configurable, and then yes, you introduce the possibility that, whoops, there's a bug.
Right. It's like your fridge. Just it's 1 kilometer large and it produces tons of things. Right.
Yeah. I mean, part of how you get Six Sigma quality is in manufacturing is by getting the tolerances very, very, very fine. Right.
That's
so that everything fits together real tight.
Yeah.
Now, if we have things that are computer driven, then you get this possibility of the screw is supposed to be 2 millimeters and it comes out 20 millimeters.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that you're right. So there's the possibility that improperly done, computer-aided manufacture could actually move the quality of manufactured items backward rather than forward.
And just another comment on manufacturing engineering. You know that regularly in computerized factories, they crash robots because somebody moved a robot just a little and others don't know about it. So I would not say that software engineers are that bad. We just don't know how engineering in other domains is having problems because they are very kept secret.
Well, I would say though, if we're talking about computer-aided manufacture, and if the robot is moving to the wrong place, then we're back to software again. So it's yet another issue of the software didn't do what the software was supposed to do, right?
I think in systems engineering you have to be aware that you have different domains, and I think one of the major problems is that the engineers in each domain are doing very good work, but actually often poor in communicating changes between the domains.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree, and that's something else that does need to be dealt with. I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You raised a lot of potential security issues. At the moment, I would say testers are more focused on quality, and there is other testers who are specialized in security. Do you think that in the future a normal tester always has to bear in mind security and have knowledge about it, or will it be that it continues that specialized companies will do security testing?
I think that there are areas of testing that will remain specialized, such as security, usability, performance, reliability, and so forth. But I think that it's important for all testers to be aware of all those other areas of testing that are going on, so that people are not working in a, with blinders on, right? The American term is in a silo, right? Unaware of what's around us. I think that's especially true of test managers and people in charge of managing quality, is that we need to do a better job of coordinating all of the testing work that's going on. I had a CEO of one of our clients tell me, these guys make investment software, investment banking software. And in that, from the initial writing of the code to it ultimately being configured and released to the customer, there are about 7 or 8 different levels of testing that happen, each level owned by a different group. And the CEO told me, my biggest problem with testing is that nobody can tell me what the true state of the quality of the software is. I can get 7 or 8 different views. They're entirely inconsistent, and I have no way of relating them to each other. I don't know what has been tested and what hasn't been tested. So I think this is a general problem that we have, is that we have these different efforts going on, but we don't coordinate them very well, right? So you're going to have a lot of gaps and overlap and things getting past us. So yeah, I think that just all of us as testing and quality professionals need to become a lot more aware of everything that's going on and everything that can affect quality. That it can't be just the tester sitting there going, well, I do functional testing and I don't have to worry about any of that other stuff. Oh, thanks, great question.
I've got a question over here.
It's not a question, it's a comment from my side. Even if you would archive to get Six Sigma quality in software, there are some other tricky problems, for instance, with autonomous cars. What to do when the car realizes that the accident isn't avoidable anymore? Should it crash the pedestrian, the cyclist, or the car coming in front of it?
Yes, right. So this is where you get back to the intersection of law and ethics and technology, right? Yes, if the car is in a kinetic situation and there is going to be a crash, how does it calculate the right thing to do? Now obviously the owner of the car is going to want his or her life to be the highest priority, and the owner of a car, somebody who's driving their own car, would probably do it that way, though there have been certainly a number of instances of selfless pilots and selfless drivers realizing that theirs was the least loss possible, and thus and driving the car or flying the plane in a way that they died, but thus fewer people died. But that's a choice, and that's seen as a moral act by an individual. If you program that into the computer, then maybe I don't want that. Maybe I, as the owner of the car, say no. Car's job is to prevent me from getting hurt, to get me from where I was to where I wanted to be, certainly, but its primary priority needs to prevent me from being hurt. So if it's going to sacrifice my life, because if I run into the 2 people on the bicycle, then that's 2 people dead versus 1 me. So I'm sorry about the 2 people on the bicycle, but they shouldn't have been in front of my driverless car. So yes, very, very interesting ethical problems there. Thank you.
Okay, one last question. Sorry, but I think you will be available in the break, during the coffee break, for some more questions.
Yes, it's not a question, it's only a remark. I think the Internet of Things as we know it today did not scare me so much. Okay, there's a huge amount of objects interconnecting with each other. But I think it's the interesting point will be when this changes to that these things all together build some kind of emergent properties, things that we cannot foresee.
Yeah.
So due to interference, due to interconnection, and suddenly there's something like a natural organism. And if we reach this point in the future, then I think it will be a very interesting moment.
Yes, I mean, of course, what you're talking about there is, again, the idea of the singularity, the self-conscious, self-aware computer, and yeah, we have, right, the emergent properties we, of course, have, I wouldn't say no way of testing for, but it's very difficult to imagine how we test for that, right? The behavior that is not deliberately engineered into the system, but will emerge from the system once it reaches a certain point. I don't know. But we better figure it out because we're gonna get there, and you know, sooner than we expect. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
this
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
And there's a little present from Vienna. With greetings
great.
from Vienna.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.